he was left for dead. Chained to a tree, bleeding and freezing in the heart of the snowbound forest, a police officer waited for the inn until two loyal K9 German Shepherds found him. No one else was coming, but these dogs, trained for courage and born for loyalty, refused to give up. In a world where darkness seemed to win, they became a miracle. What happened next will break your heart and restore your faith in hope. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far the story of courage and faith can travel. And if you believe in miracles, if you believe every life is worth saving, hit subscribe, because this story will stay with you long after it ends. Bitter Creek, Wyoming, seemed to hold its breath in the heart of winter. January's chill pressed in from every side. The valley was locked beneath a quilt of snow, the pines weighed down and silent. No birds called. Even the wind, fierce and impatient, found it difficult to move through the thick, frozen air. This was the kind of landscape that tested anyone who dared to enter it unless they were born for it or had no choice. Officer Rachel Vance, 29, moved steadily along a narrow patrol trail where few dared to walk in this season. She was tall, athletic, and carried herself with the quiet focus of someone who'd learned early to trust her own instincts. Her hair, pale gold, was braided tight and disappeared under a navy beanie emblazoned with the Bitter Creek police shield. Rachel's brown eyes, wide and intelligent, swept the woods constantly. Even now, with only her two K9 partners for company, she felt the old vigilance sharpen. Rachel's life had changed the winter before, when her mentor Ellen, the department's first female K9 handler, had died saving a lost child. Since then, Rachel had carried Ellen's lessons like secret prayers, especially on days like this, when the snow seemed endless and the world felt brittle. Beside her ran two German Shepherds, both off-leash, but never straying far. Valor, 7 years old, was the senior dog, a handsome, muscular shepherd with black and tan fur grizzled by age. A jagged scar marked his left ear, a token from a near-fatal tangle with a mountain lion 2 years before. Valor moved with a purposeful, quiet strength. Every sense seemed attuned to Rachel's unspoken commands. His story was well known. As a rookie called Samson, he had leapt through a burning window to pull a trapped child to safety. From that night on, his name changed. The department called him Valor, not just for his bravery, but for the dignity and steadiness he brought to every crisis. Bear, 4 years old, was a contrast larger-boned, with a caramel muzzle and alert, dark eyes. Younger, more playful, Bear adored snow, relished affection, and had an impulsive streak that sometimes made Rachel laugh. But Bear was also sharp and loyal. When Valor focused, Bear matched him, letting instinct and training override mischief. The day had begun with routine K9 winter training. Rachel led her team through deep drifts and over hidden routes, sometimes offering a word of encouragement or a gentle pat. The world was quiet, just the crunch of boots and paws, the clouds drifting low above the trees. Every so often, Bear would surge ahead and then double back, tail high. Valor kept close, always watching. Suddenly, Bear halted mid-step, body tense. He lifted his nose, sniffing hard, then looked at Rachel, whining softly. Rachel paused. She had learned to listen to Bear's nose. Valor quickly moved beside Bear, scenting the air. His ears pricked forward. He gave a sharp bark. Rachel's heart sped up. The wind carried something new, an acrid tang. Smoke. "Go," Rachel commanded, and the trio moved as one. They plunged through a gap in the pines, snow scattering with every bound. The scent of smoke grew stronger, mingling with the sharp cold. Rachel saw it first, a thin gray ribbon twisting between the trunks, then a flicker of fire clinging to the roots of an ancient pine. But the true shock was at the base of the tree. A man, shackled by thick iron chains, slumped against the blackened bark. His dark blue police uniform was ripped and blood-stained, his boots half frozen into the snow. Blood marked his temple and his lips were tinged blue, breath shallow and clouded. He looked as if he'd been abandoned to die in the cold. Rachel raced forward, falling to her knees in the snow. "Thomas!" Even battered, she recognized him. Officer Thomas Grady, a legend in Bitter Creek PD for his integrity and grit. Thomas, 42, had a weathered face, dark hair streaked gray, and the powerful build of a man who hiked the mountains year-round. He was known for never cutting corners and making enemies with anyone who did. Thomas's eyes fluttered but did not quite open. Rachel fumbled for his wrist, feeling for a pulse, faint but still there. Rachel keyed her radio, voice low but urgent. "Dispatch, this is Officer Vance, officer down. North Pine Trail, hypothermia, head trauma, victim is chained, requesting immediate rescue." She ripped off a glove and cupped Thomas's cheek, whispering, "Stay with me. Help is coming." Meanwhile, Bear, following the smell of blood and iron, began digging at the snow around Thomas's legs and waist. His strong paws uncovered the heavy iron chain wound tightly around Thomas, freeing his boots and part of the links from their snowy prison. Valor pressed close to Thomas, laying his warm body against the officer's side, both to offer warmth and to steady him, nose nudging Thomas's gloved hand as if to promise he would not let him go. As Bear dug, Valor's nose bumped something small, half buried by the snow, a white handkerchief, its edge burned, the name Ellen, stitched in careful blue thread. Rachel's throat tightened. Ellen had given such handkerchiefs only to those she trusted most. It was as if, even in death, Ellen was reaching out to remind Rachel of what mattered. Never leave anyone behind. Rachel, choking back emotion, took the multi-tool from her belt and began working at the chain's padlock, but the metal was frozen and stiff. She focused on keeping Thomas conscious, talking to him, squeezing his hand, telling him stories about Valor and Bear and how strong they all were together. Thomas shivered, breath rasping. Wouldn't let them. Illegal hunting. No. Permit. Rachel squeezed his hand. "You did the right thing." "Just hold on," Valor, sensing the danger wasn't over, barked in crisp, measured bursts, the universal rescue signal for lost or injured officers. Bear, finished exposing the chain, sat at Thomas's feet, eyes never leaving the officer's face. Time stretched. The wind howled and snow swirled around them. Rachel checked Thomas's pulse again, felt his frozen hand in hers, refusing to let fear win. Valor and Bear pressed close, one for warmth, one for watchfulness. Then at last, over the distant hush, a sound pierced the storm, the faint, echoing wail of sirens. Rachel's head snapped up. Hope, thin but burning, flickered in her chest. "Hold on, Thomas," she whispered, tears threatening. "They're almost here." Beside her, Valor and Bear stood sentinel silent, strong and unmovable as the ancient pines refusing to leave their friend as the night's cold darkness broke with the promise of rescue. The shriek of sirens, once faint and uncertain in the storm, grew rapidly into the clearing, a sound that cut through the howling wind and brittle hush of snowbound Bitter Creek. Rachel raised her gloved hand and flashed her light in urgent, wide arcs above her head, sending a beacon of hope into the swirling white. She didn't dare let herself sag with relief. Thomas's breathing had grown shallow, his eyelids fluttering. Bear pressed close to his legs, tail still as a rod, while Valor, never ceasing, alternated between licking the officer's face and barking short, precise signals at the shadows between the trees. When Rachel looked into the older dog's amber eyes, she saw not just obedience, but a fierce need to protect, to hold the world together until help arrived. The lead snowmobile skidded into view, red lights flashing, the sound muffled by the storm. The first to leap off was paramedic Sean McAllister, a man of 50 with a thick brown mustache, a square jaw that rarely smiled, and a straightforward, unflappable presence. Sean moved with the efficiency of someone who had pulled more than one victim out of these woods, his heavy canvas jacket already dusted with snow, boots battered by years on rescue duty. "Status?" he barked, kneeling beside Rachel, already unpacking thermal blankets and checking Thomas's pulse. Rachel relayed what she knew in clipped sentences, her voice steady despite the cold biting into her skin. She glanced up as a second figure arrived. Firefighter Denise Tran, slim, of Vietnamese descent, her hair short and black beneath a red helmet, movements nimble and brisk. Denise was new to Bitter Creek, known for her sharp wit and a resolve that had earned her quiet respect in the town's mostly male rescue team. Denise and Sean worked in practiced silence. Denise snapped open trauma shears and sliced away the chain that Bear had already helped expose, her breath coming in little puffs of steam. "Got it, padlock's rusted. He's lucky you found him," she muttered, shooting Rachel a look of measured admiration. Sean wrapped Thomas in 2 layers of foil blankets, calling for an oxygen mask from the third rescuer, a younger woman named Maria Dominguez. Maria, stocky and small with a quick, reassuring smile, handed over the kit and set to work laying out bandages and gauze. She murmured softly to Thomas as she dabbed the blood from his face, her Spanish-accented English as gentle as the snow falling around them. Rachel, barely aware of her own shivering, kept pressure on Thomas's wrist and kept talking, grounding him in the present. Valor lay across Thomas's thighs, radiating warmth, his ears flicking at every new sound. Bear limped a little now, favoring his right forepaw, and Denise noticed immediately. "Your young one's bleeding here," she said, kneeling to check Bear's leg. Rachel saw a thin line of red on the snowy fur, a thorn embedded just above the paw. Denise deftly extracted it with tweezers, pressed a pad to the wound, and ruffled Bear's head. "He'll be fine, tough guy," she whispered, and Bear's tail gave a feeble wag. With chains finally removed and wounds roughly dressed, Sean and Maria braced Thomas's body, careful not to jostle his bruised chest or split lip. As they eased him onto the rescue sled, he managed a weak sound. Rachel leaned in, catching a whisper. "They said not to come back. Saw faces." I know one. Rachel filed the words away for later. For now, her only job was to get him out alive. The rescue party retraced their route, moving cautiously over the rough terrain. Denise led, scanning for obstacles, while Sean and Maria balanced the sled. Rachel walked beside Valor and Bear now moving slowly but refusing to be carried. Snow thickened and the forest grew even darker, the silence broken only by the crunch of boots and the distant drone of the other snowmobiles circling for stragglers. Through the gloom, Rachel's nerves prickled. Valor, too, glanced repeatedly into the blackness between trees, hackles bristling. Rachel trusted the dog's instincts more than her own. She shifted closer to Bear and felt for her sidearm. A sudden gust sent snow streaming across the trail, momentarily blinding them. Valor halted, ears flat, eyes scanning the tree line. Rachel's pulse jumped, but there was nothing, only the moaning wind. "Easy, Valor," she said quietly. The dog didn't relax, not fully, but accepted her reassurance and pushed onward, never letting Thomas out of his sight. The last stretch was grueling. Thomas shivered violently beneath his blankets, murmuring names and half-formed warnings. Maria squeezed his shoulder, her voice low and soothing. Denise kept Bear close, checking the pad on his paw. Rachel felt every second like a lifetime, the darkness closing around them as they slogged back toward the trailhead where more lights, more voices, and finally the ambulance waited. At last, the snow thinned and lanterns swung between trees. Rescue had arrived in force. Sean and Maria hoisted Thomas into the back of the ambulance, starting an IV and prepping warm saline. Denise clapped Rachel on the shoulder, eyes softening. "You did good. Without you and your team, he wouldn't have lasted." Rachel only nodded, suddenly exhausted as adrenaline drained away. Valor, for the first time, whined softly and pressed his head against Rachel's knee, as if asking permission to let down his guard. Bear, brave but limping, settled beside the rear wheel of the ambulance. Maria cleaned and bandaged his paw again, feeding him a small square of protein bar. The sight made Rachel smile despite everything. Before the doors closed, Thomas caught Rachel's gaze. "Don't leave," he whispered. Rachel touched his arm. "We're here, Thomas. We're not going anywhere." The doors shut, engine revved, and red lights faded into the snow. Rachel stood in the hush, Valor pressed to her side, Bear leaning against her leg. Around them, the rescue team loaded gear, their faces tired but relieved. Denise grinned, and Maria flashed a thumbs up. Sean, brusque as always, just nodded his approval. The wind carried a final warning from the forest, and Rachel glanced back. Valor was watching too, eyes bright and wary. Something was unfinished in those woods, something that would not let go easily. But for tonight, they had won a small victory. As Rachel led Valor and Bear to the rescue truck, Bear's limp already easing, she pressed Ellen's handkerchief to her chest, a silent promise to those she'd lost and those she had saved. In the cold, in the dark, the bond between woman and dog had held fast. Rachel took one last look at the place where Thomas had nearly died, then turned toward the waiting lights of Bitter Creek, her friends at her side and her courage burning bright in the winter night. Thomas Grady woke to the antiseptic sting of alcohol and the steady beep of a heart monitor, the warm light of the ranger station's infirmary, a shocking contrast to the cold oblivion of the forest. The walls were paneled with honey-colored wood, a gas stove hissed softly in the corner, and the storm outside was reduced to a dull hush against triple-glazed windows. Thomas blinked hard, his vision swimming as faces came into focus. Rachel Vance, standing over him with a look of hard-earned relief, and, at the foot of his cot, 2 German shepherds. Valor lay with his head across Thomas's boots, amber eyes never leaving the man's face, while Bear, his bandaged paw tucked beneath him, slept close, ear flicking at every small sound. For a moment, Thomas let himself rest in the simple warmth of survival. Rachel's posture was unmistakably protective. In the brighter light, her features showed the exhaustion of a sleepless night. Dark shadows beneath her eyes, hair drawn back more carelessly than usual. She pressed a cup of hot broth into Thomas's hands. "Sip it slow. You're lucky to be here." Thomas tried to smile but winced. His throat was raw and his ribs ached with every breath. He nodded in thanks, the steam blurring his vision. "Where are the dogs? Did they—" Rachel gestured gently. "Right here. They haven't left your side." Valor in particulars barely closed his eyes. As Thomas sipped, the paramedic from the rescue, a woman named Maria Dominguez, short and muscular with gentle eyes and quick hands, checked his pulse, adjusted his IV, and murmured encouragement in a blend of English and soft Spanish. "No infection, but you'll need rest," she said, voice firm but kind. "You're safe now, officer." Her presence was a comfort. She'd seen enough pain to know when words did more harm than silence. As dusk crept in, the station's other two overnight staff arrived. One was Jake Donnelly, a wiry man in his 40s with a faded beard and quick, suspicious blue eyes. Jake had the air of someone always braced for trouble. He'd lost his wife to a drunk driver years ago, and the grief still shadowed his interactions, making him gruff but weirdly loyal to anyone in his circle. The other was Lila Forbes, a round-faced, soft-spoken dispatch clerk in her 50s, whose laughter, when it came, was usually at her own expense. Lila set about brewing strong coffee, her short fingers trembling just slightly as she fussed with the battered old percolator. Evening deepened and the station settled into uneasy quiet. The wind rattled the eaves, snow continued to fall in heavy veils. Rachel busied herself tending to Bear's paw, giving the dog a reassuring scratch behind the ears. Valor would not budge from Thomas's side, only occasionally lifting his head to sniff the air or gaze searchingly at the darkened windows. As the hour drew close to midnight, the overhead lights flickered, then failed, plunging the infirmary into darkness. Emergency lanterns kicked in, casting the room in a pale, trembling glow. "Generator must have cut out," muttered Jake, already heading toward the rear hallway, flashlight in hand. Rachel's nerves prickled. Something about the blackout felt wrong, too abrupt for routine winter outages. Valor reacted instantly, his body going rigid, lips drawn back in a low growl. He pressed against Thomas protectively, then darted to the frosted glass of the door, hackles up, nose twitching. Rachel followed his gaze and caught, just for a moment, the movement of a shadow outside, a figure too tall to be the wind, too deliberate for a stray animal. She motioned for silence, heart pounding as she gripped her sidearm, Lila clutching her coffee mug as if it were a talisman. Jake returned, flashlight beam jittery. "Someone's outside," Rachel whispered, her voice thin but steady. "Valor's never wrong." Jake grunted, checking the lock on the side entrance. "Stay here," he muttered, vanishing into the gloom. A minute later, Bear sat up, ears cocked. The station seemed to hold its breath. Outside, footsteps crunched in the snow, too slow, too measured. Valor let out a warning bark that sounded almost human in its alarm. Rachel positioned herself between Thomas and the door, adrenaline burning away the fog of fatigue. Then, just as suddenly, the figure outside retreated, melting back into the swirl of snow beyond the windows. Jake came back, breathing hard. "Didn't see anyone, just tracks heading toward the tree line." Rachel didn't relax. Valor kept watch at the door for a long time, only settling when the wind died down and the generator thumped back to life, flooding the station with unsteady, artificial light. Afterward, Rachel checked Thomas's things, a bundle of blood-stained uniform, wallet, and a folded note she found wedged in his jacket pocket. She frowned, smoothing out the crumpled scrap. In jagged letters it read, "Do not speak." Or else Rachel showed it to Thomas, who shook his head in confusion and fear. I never saw it before," he croaked. Valor nosed the note, nostrils flaring as if trying to memorize the scent. Rachel slipped it into an evidence bag, face set in grim determination. The station gradually quieted. Lila made cocoa for everyone and told a rambling story about the last big storm, her voice a gentle lull. Jake prowled the corridors with his flashlight, grumbling about city boys who didn't know a generator from a squirrel. Maria finished her shift, offering Thomas a smile and promising to return at dawn. Rachel dozed in a chair beside the bed, her hand resting on Valor's thick ruff. Outside, the wind eased, but the sense of unease lingered like the taste of old ash. No one in the station slept soundly. Valor, unwavering, kept his post at Thomas's bedside, every muscle coiled. As snow fell outside, the darkness pressed in, and the feeling that some silent enemy still lingered beyond the glass would not leave them, not yet. Morning crept slowly into the ranger station, painting the snow with a pale blue light that barely warmed the glass. For the first time since the rescue, Thomas Grady slept with something like peace, his face less pinched, the lines on his forehead softened. Rachel Vance hovered nearby, her fatigue etched into every gesture. She moved with quiet care, rechecking bandages and watching over both Thomas and the two K9s as the world outside gradually brightened. Valor, always alert, had finally dozed, head resting on his paws at the foot of Thomas's cot. Bear, his paw freshly bandaged, lay sprawled near the wood stove, warm and drowsy but eyes half open, refusing to fully surrender to sleep. Rachel herself looked older than her 29 years this morning, lips tight, hair pulled back in a loose knot, shoulders rigid from a night spent half awake. Jake Donnelly and Lila Forbes bustled quietly through their routines, Jake double-checking the station doors, Lila brewing coffee so strong it could chase the cold from anyone's bones. Maria Dominguez, the paramedic, stopped by just after sunrise, her dark eyes gentle as she changed Thomas's IV and checked Bear's paw one last time before heading back to town. By noon, Thomas was able to sit up and speak in a rough whisper. He gestured for Rachel to pull her chair close, Valor immediately lifting his head to watch. "I remember," Thomas rasped. "I remember everything." Rachel nodded, gently encouraging him to continue. "I was doing my rounds. I spotted a pickup with out-of-state plates, parked just past the southern firebreak. Something felt wrong, so I asked for their permits. 4 men, all in hunting gear. 2 kept their faces down. 1 pretended not to speak English. When I pressed, they jumped me. I fought back, but..." He trailed off, grimacing at the memory. "They dragged me into the woods. Hit me hard. I tried to see their faces but only caught a glimpse. One of them..." Thomas paused, searching Rachel's face. "One of them said something. I recognized the voice. It was someone from the department. Someone I know." The implication hung heavy in the room. Rachel's eyes narrowed, gears turning behind her calm exterior. "Are you sure?" Thomas nodded, certainty burning in his eyes. "Positive. I just don't know who. Everything after that is a blur." Valor shifted, almost as if sensing the weight of what was said, and pressed his head gently into Thomas's lap. After lunch, Rachel leashed Valor and Bear, bundled up against the wind, and drove with Jake to the site of the fire. The forest was still scarred, blackened earth beneath a crust of ice, branches snapped and shorn by the storm. Rachel let Valor off the lead first. The old shepherd moved with silent determination, nose low, scanning every drift and footprint. Bear, limping slightly but eager, followed suit, sniffing and pawing through the snow. Valor stopped abruptly at the edge of the clearing, his hackles raised. Rachel knelt and followed his line of sight. There, half buried in frozen mud, was a fresh tire track, a deep groove from a heavy truck, with a faint oil stain nearby. Next to the tire mark, Bear unearthed a rusted length of chain identical to the links that had bound Thomas, but newer, the end melted by fire. Rachel bagged the evidence, her mind whirling with the possibilities. A pickup with no permit, new chain, and now a lead on a vehicle. Jake watched her work, his blue eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Looks like someone tried to cover their tracks, but the storm froze everything in place." Rachel nodded, tension coiling in her stomach. "This wasn't random, Jake." They knew where to strike. And Thomas said one of them was a familiar voice. Jake scratched his beard, scowling. "That's bad news." Just as Rachel finished snapping photos of the tracks, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She stepped away, answering with a terse, "Vance." The line crackled. For a moment she thought it was the wind. Then a voice, warped and nearly unrecognizable, came through, a hiss that made her blood run cold. "If you want to keep your friends safe, leave Grady alone. Anyone who helps him will regret it." The line went dead. Rachel's breath fogged in the air. She turned back to Jake, face pale but determined. "We have a real problem," she said, voice low. "This goes deeper than I thought." Jake's scowl deepened. "What do you want to do?" "Get everyone back to the station. Lock down. And I want a list of every officer on the roster last night, with alibis." Jake nodded, his skepticism melting into resolve. "I'll handle it." Driving back, Valor's posture was tense, ears flicking constantly, eyes sharp as he watched the tree line slide past the window. Bear whined quietly, pressing against Rachel's shoulder for reassurance. The ranger station appeared through the snow, lights burning bright against the encroaching dusk. Back inside, Rachel gathered everyone in the briefing room. Lila poured coffee, Maria handed out sandwiches, and Jake printed out the shift log. Rachel told them what Thomas remembered, omitting only the most sensitive detail, the suspicion of an inside man. As she finished, she studied each face. Lila's eyes were wide with worry. Maria, ever calm, only nodded and squeezed Thomas's hand. Jake's jaw was set, ready for trouble. Rachel fed Valor and Bear, kneeling to check Bear's paw one more time. Both dogs pressed close, as if understanding that the danger was not over. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. The world felt smaller, the shadows deeper. As the night fell, Rachel sat at her desk, piecing together evidence tire marks, melted chains, the thread on the phone, and the memory of a voice in the dark. The chapter closed not with answers, but with the team drawing closer together, the canines curled at their feet, and the sense that someone was still watching, waiting in the cold just beyond the window. Outside, Bitter Creek was lost in a whirling blizzard. Snow scoured the ranger station's windows, erasing the world in shifting white. The wind howled in the chimney, and inside, the team tried to convince themselves that their reinforced doors and battered old rifles would be enough to hold back whatever darkness waited beyond the glass. Rachel paced the main room with her boots unlaced, her eyes drawn again and again to the shadows that danced in the corners. The canines, restless and uneasy, mirrored her tension. Valor sat by the door, every muscle coiled, ears sharp to any sound. Bear's wounded paw had mostly healed, but he still limped a little, pressing close to Rachel for warmth and reassurance. Most of the station had settled for the night. Jake Donnelly slumped on the battered old couch, shotgun across his knees, his beard flecked with gray, and his breathing deep but not quite restful. Leela Forbes, round-faced and ever attentive, finished washing the mugs in the sink, glancing anxiously at the storm outside. Maria Dominguez, exhausted from 2 shifts in a row, finally closed her eyes in the staff room, head pillowed on a stack of towels. In the small infirmary, Thomas Grady dozed in uneasy sleep, Valor sprawled protectively beside his bed. No one noticed the dark shapes that moved just beyond the reach of the porch light. The snow muffled every step, and the men who crept around the back of the station wore masks, parkas, and the ruthless confidence of those certain they'd never be caught. Their leader, a man with a hard jaw, cruel eyes, and a military bearing, paused at the rear entrance, checking his watch. His name was Wayne Hunt, a former logger turned fixer, known for his ability to make problems vanish. Tonight, his target was simple: silence Thomas Grady and anyone who stood in the way. The storm masked their approach. Wayne's men spread out, boots crunching softly over the drifted snow. One tall, thin, with nervous hands produced a set of skeleton keys. Another, stocky and silent, carried a black duffel. In the howling wind, the first lock gave way with a barely audible click. Inside, Valor lifted his head, ears straining. He whined, low and deep. Rachel, in the main room, stiffened. Bear, beside her, bristled and growled. Rachel flicked off the overhead lamp, letting her eyes adjust to the dim emergency lights. She unsnapped the holster at her hip, heart pounding, and listened. A thump, the faintest creak. Someone was at the rear entrance. Valor sprang from the infirmary, barking with sudden, explosive fury, a sound that shattered the hush and brought everyone awake. Jake leapt from the couch, shotgun at the ready. Lila ducked behind the counter, phone in trembling hands. Maria, half awake, grabbed her first aid bag and hid behind the staff room door. 3 masked men burst into the kitchen. Rachel fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the boom rolling through the cramped rooms. Bear lunged, teeth bared, driving one of the intruders back against the pantry shelves. Jake fired into the air, shouting, "Get out!" Armed response. The men hesitated, startled by the canine's aggression and the sudden human resistance. Wayne Hunt cursed, directing his men with harsh, practiced gestures. Valor, hearing the commotion, doubled back toward the infirmary. He saw another intruder, this one smaller, hunched in a black coat slipping toward Thomas's bed, a knife glinting in his fist. Valor hurled himself forward, jaws locking onto the attacker's arm, dragging him away from Thomas with ferocious strength. The man screamed, trying to shake the dog loose, but Valor held fast, snarling with a fury born of loyalty. In the struggle, Valor tore the sleeve from the man's coat, exposing a tattoo in eagle, military style, with a line of numbers beneath. Thomas, jolted awake by the chaos, rolled off the bed, clutching the IV stand like a weapon. In the kitchen, Rachel and Bear kept the remaining attackers at bay. Bear snapped at the tall intruder's leg, drawing blood, while Rachel advanced, gun leveled. Jake moved to cover the hallway, his presence blocking any escape to the rear. "Call for backup, Lila," Rachel barked, never taking her eyes off the masked men. Lila fumbled with the emergency radio, voice shaking as she broadcast their distress call into the static-laced night. Wayne Hunt saw the assault was failing. He barked orders to retreat. The men backed away, dragging their wounded comrades still locked in Valor's jaws. Finally, Wayne fired a shot into the ceiling, the bullet embedding itself near the rafters, buying just enough distraction for the gang to break loose. Valor, bloodied but unbroken, released his grip only when the attacker's arm fell limp. The men vanished into the blizzard, boot prints already filling with fresh snow. Rachel swept the house, checking every room. Jake secured the doors while Lila sobbed quietly in the corner, comforted by Maria. Bear limped to Valor's side, licking his face in reassurance. Thomas slumped against the infirmary wall, pale but alive, gripping the IV stand. "They're gone?" he gasped. Rachel nodded, holstering her weapon. "For now, but they'll be back. They want you silenced," Thomas Valor, panting, pressed against Thomas's legs, refusing to let the man out of his sight. Jake, face grim, inspected the torn sleeve Valor had ripped away. "Recognize this tattoo, Grady?" Thomas peered at it, recognition dawning. "That's ex-military. Used to see it on Hunt's crew back when they were loggers." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Wayne Hunt?" Thomas nodded, breathless. "He used to run permits for the north side. Always trouble." Bear whimpered. Rachel checked his paw again. No fresh blood, just reopened stitches. Maria patched the dog as Jake examined the bullet hole in the ceiling, cursing under his breath. Rachel gathered the torn sleeve and tattoo evidence in a Ziploc bag, a thin but vital clue. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the team huddled in the kitchen. Rachel, Jake, Lila, Maria, Thomas, and the two battered but fiercely loyal K9S Valor, licking his wounds, curled at Thomas's feet. Bear leaned into Rachel's side, watching the doors with haunted eyes. No one slept. Every window and door was double-locked. But within the battered ranger station, hope and courage burned brighter than the blizzard's fury. The enemy was not defeated, but tonight, thanks to Valor, Bear, and their human family, Thomas Grady had survived another attempt on his life. Morning broke over Bitter Creek with a brittle, uncertain light. The snow had stopped, leaving the world white and eerily calm. But inside the ranger station, nerves were raw and sleep was only a rumor. Rachel Vance stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, her eyes bloodshot but steady. Thomas Grady sat at the end of the table, his face a map of bruises and exhaustion, but there was a new intensity in his gaze, a kind of grim determination that had replaced fear. Valor and Bear lounged at their feet, the older dog keeping a wary eye on the doors, while Bear, still favoring his bandaged paw, napped in fits and starts. Jake Donnelly busied himself checking the locks for the 5th time that morning, while Lila Forbes typed up her incident reports with trembling fingers. Maria Dominguez, whose shift was ending, stopped to squeeze Rachel's shoulder, her gentle presence offering a brief, wordless comfort. It felt as if everyone was waiting for the next blow to fall, but Rachel was already moving forward. After the previous night's attack, she and Thomas knew they couldn't wait for help to come to them. Thomas, leaning on a crutch, hobbled to the small office at the rear of the station. Rachel joined him, the tension between them replaced by the camaraderie of shared survival. "We need proof," Thomas said, voice rough but resolute. "Something's wrong with Dalton. He knew too much about that attack." Rachel nodded. "I'll dig into the records. You check the surveillance logs. Let's find our mole." They worked in silence, punctuated only by the click of keys and the occasional whir of the ancient printer. Rachel sifted through stacks of permit paperwork, looking for irregularities in logging and hunting licenses. Thomas, brow furrowed, scanned security footage from the previous week. Valor padded into the office, nosing through the piles, occasionally resting his chin on Thomas's lap for a quick scratch. It didn't take long for Rachel to spot something strange. 3 logging permits signed off by Dalton bore inconsistencies, dates didn't line up, and the digital signatures had been copied from earlier documents. Even more troubling, she found bank statements on the shared drive that suggested thousands of dollars had been funneled into a private account under Dalton's name, the transactions disguised as wildlife restoration grants. Her hands shook as she printed out the evidence. Meanwhile, Thomas found footage from 2 nights before, Sheriff Dalton arriving at the station after midnight, alone, with 2 large duffel bags. On the grainy video, Dalton moved quickly, glancing over his shoulder, then slipping out the back door into the trees. Why would he go outside at that hour? Thomas murmured. Valor, sensing the tension, stood and trotted to the rear window, sniffing intently. Jake knocked on the office door. "You two need a hand?" His tone was gruff, but his eyes were sharp with curiosity. Rachel nodded. "Can you cover the main entrance? And keep Lila and Maria close." "We're about to confront Dalton." Jake grunted approval and stalked away. Rachel called Dalton's cell, voice calm but clipped. "Sheriff, can you come into the office?" "We have some questions." Dalton appeared moments later, his bulk filling the doorway. He was a man in his late 50s, with a thick gray mustache, heavy brow, and a confident gait that came from decades of authority. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes flickered when he saw the papers in Rachel's hand. "Something wrong?" Dalton's tone was smooth, but a muscle ticked in his jaw. Rachel slid the forged permits across the desk. "Why don't you explain these?" Dalton glanced at the papers, then smiled a thin, chilling expression. "You're seeing shadows, Vance. Those are all above board." Thomas stepped forward, holding up the bank printouts. "What about these transfers, Sheriff? Wildlife restoration or personal slush fund?" Dalton's face reddened, but he didn't answer. Valor moved between the humans, hackles raised. Rachel felt the air go cold. "We know you were here after midnight 2 nights ago." "Security cameras don't lie." Dalton's hands flexed at his sides. "Careful, Vance. You're accusing a superior." Rachel squared her shoulders. "No, Sheriff. I'm presenting evidence, and you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." Jake and Lila entered with backup radios, standing ready. Dalton looked at each of them, weighing his chances. Finally, he lifted his hands in surrender. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he muttered. Rachel cuffed him, reading him his rights in a voice that barely wavered. As Dalton was led out, he leaned close to Thomas and whispered, "You're only halfway there, Grady. There's still someone in the woods who makes the rules. Don't trust anyone, not even your dogs." Rachel's hand tightened on Dalton's shoulder, steering him toward the holding room. Jake searched Dalton and found a burner phone and a small map marked with red X's 1 just behind the station. Rachel's gut twisted. She turned to Valor, who was pacing and sniffing at the back door. "Let's check it out," she told Thomas and Jake. Lila stayed behind to watch Dalton, Maria on the radio with County Dispatch. Outside, the air was sharp and stinging, snow crunching underfoot. Valor led the way, nose close to the ground. Bear, more cautious, followed, his tail low. Near the edge of the tree line, Valor stopped at a patch of disturbed snow. He dug furiously, paws flying. Rachel knelt beside him and pulled away icy clods, revealing a shallow pit. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a heavy duffel bag. Thomas helped haul it out, his fingers trembling. Unzipped, the bag revealed forged IDs, fake permits, several unregistered handguns, and a packet of cash marked with the logo of a local timber company. Rachel stared at the evidence. He was planning for this, or someone was. As they returned inside, Jake secured the back door and Lila radioed for county deputies to pick up Dalton. Thomas, clutching the evidence bag, looked at Rachel. "If Dalton's just a pawn, who's really behind this?" Rachel shook her head, lips pressed tight. "We'll find out. But now we know what we're up against." Inside the ranger station, the team gathered battle-worn but united. Valor leaned against Thomas's leg, Bear curled protectively at Rachel's feet. The snow began to fall again, muting the world in silence. But inside, the truth had started to come to light. Dawn broke over Bitter Creek like a thin blade, slicing through the fog and painting the battered landscape in gray and silver. The air was sharp, filled with the hush of a world waiting for answers. Rachel Vance stood on the porch of the ranger station, her breath misting, nerves taut as the radio crackled with a fresh update from county headquarters. The last of Dalton's gang was still missing, believed to be hiding somewhere in the northern pines. Thomas Grady, wrapped in his thick parka, his face still lined with the pain and fatigue of the past week, shouldered a battered police rifle with a renewed sense of purpose. His eyes met Rachel's hard, determined, but shadowed by memories of betrayal. Valor stood between them, the 7-year-old German Shepherd looking every bit the seasoned veteran, his fur bristled with tension, amber eyes sharp, every sense trained on the wild white world beyond the station. They were not alone. The snow was thick, and the wind whispered secrets through the trees. The rest of the team, Jake Donnelly with his shotgun, Lila Forbes with her notebooks, Maria Dominguez helping patch wounds, remained at the station to guard the evidence and protect the civilians. Rachel and Thomas had decided, with the sheriff's blessing, that the best defense was a swift offense. Someone had to track the last of the gang before they struck again. Their destination was an abandoned log cabin deep in the pines, a place locals called Wanderer's End. The place had a bad reputation: boarded windows, moss climbing the rotting roof, rumors of old crimes whispered at the market. But the clues: boot prints in the snow, a fresh trail of blood from a hurried wound pointed north. Rachel, her heart pounding with both dread and resolve, drove the snowmobile while Thomas scanned the forest ahead, rifle ready. Valor ran beside them, his paws silent in the powder, breath curling in white clouds, ears pricked for any sign of danger. The journey was brutal. Drifts as high as Rachel's waist blocked their progress. The cold gnawed through gloves and boots, and the forest grew darker as they pressed deeper into its heart. They moved in silence, all three alert to the slightest snap of a twig or rush of wind. At last the cabin came into view, a squat shadow in the trees, its door hanging open, snow swirling through the gap. Thomas raised a gloved hand, signaling for silence. Rachel eased off the throttle, and the snowmobile sputtered to a halt. Valor crept forward, nose to the ground, every muscle taut. Inside, the darkness was almost complete except for a faint light flickering beyond the broken door. Thomas gestured to Rachel, his jaw set. "We go in quiet. Watch my back." Rachel nodded, pulling her sidearm, heart in her throat. They entered, boots crunching on old pine needles. The air was heavy with dust and fear. On a battered table, papers and cans littered the surface. Then a sudden movement, a flash of metal. Mark Howie, once a trusted ranger and now revealed as Dalton's inside man, lunged from the shadows, pistol raised. The betrayal in his eyes was cold and unrepentant. A shot rang out. Valor moved with impossible speed, throwing himself between Thomas and the gun. The bullet struck the dog's side with a sickening thud, knocking him to the ground. Rachel screamed, firing at Mark, who ducked behind a crate, returning fire. Thomas, shaking, dragged Valor behind the wood stove, blood staining the dog's fur a dark, ugly red. "Stay with me, buddy," Thomas whispered, pressing his parka to the wound. Despite the pain, Valor refused to stay down. With a deep, shuddering growl, he forced himself upright, swaying but determined. Mark tried to make a break for the back door, but Valor, bleeding and limping, blocked his path, snapping and barking with all the fury of a dog who would not let his friends down. Mark fired again, missing by inches. Rachel charged, tackling Mark and knocking the gun from his hand. Thomas followed, pinning the man's arms while Rachel cuffed him, her hands shaking. Valor collapsed at Rachel's feet, tongue lolling, eyes desperate but triumphant. As the dust settled, Thomas noticed a box kicked open during the fight. Inside was a stack of old photographs. On top, a faded black and white image caught his eye. Sheriff Dalton, Mark Howie, and shockingly a much younger man who looked exactly like Rachel, except with broader shoulders and a square jaw. It was her father, Michael Vance, a man she barely remembered. The three stood arm in arm, smiling, at the very same cabin. Thomas showed Rachel, whose face paled as she stared at the photo. He was friends with them. "Why didn't he ever say?" she whispered. The realization that her family was entwined in the story's dark roots hit her like the cold. They secured Mark, tied and groaning on the floor, and called in the location to the station. Thomas carried Valor to the snowmobile, his hands shaking but careful, and Rachel wrapped her coat around the bleeding dog. "Hold on, Valor." "Please," she murmured. The dog's tail thumped weakly. Back at the station, the arrival was chaotic. Maria and Lila rushed to tend Valor. Jake secured Mark in a makeshift holding cell. Rachel clung to the photograph, trying to make sense of the past. Thomas gripped her shoulder, silent but supportive. Valor, his breathing ragged, received emergency care. The atmosphere in the station was tense, a cocktail of relief, shock, and the old ache of secrets revealed. That night, as the blizzard rattled the eaves, Rachel sat by Valor's side, the photo trembling in her hands. The cabin's legacy had come home at last, and with it, the knowledge that their fight was not only for survival, but for the truth that bound all their lives together. Winter in Bitter Creek slowly loosened its grip, but for weeks the air around the ranger station was thick with tension and hope. The old building buzzed with movement, deputies came and went, investigators pored over files, and every day brought fresh relief to a wounded, wary community. Inside, the atmosphere was transformed. Where there had once been suspicion and dread, now there was pride, gratitude, and an unspoken promise to never again let darkness take root unnoticed. In the makeshift clinic, Valor lay wrapped in blankets on a camp bed, his fur shaved and stitched along the ribs, an IV taped gently to his foreleg. The aftermath of the gunshot was brutal days spent drifting in and out of fever, the room filled with low voices and the steady beeping of medical machines. Maria Dominguez hardly left his side, her dark eyes focused and gentle, her voice a soothing murmur as she monitored the healing wound. She worked with the local veterinarian, Dr. Samuel Hart, a sturdy, silver-haired man in his 60s, hands thick and steady, a man known for his quiet wisdom and devotion to the animals of Bitter Creek. Dr. Hart's approach was no nonsense, but he'd developed a soft spot for Valor, who never whimpered, never snapped, just endured with a warrior's dignity. Rachel came by each morning, her face drawn and pale but lit with hope. She brought Valor his favorite treats, frozen blueberries, a soft, battered tennis ball, and sat with him in the dawn light, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent. Rachel's own life had changed utterly in just a few days. The discovery of the old photo, her father's hidden history, the web of betrayal now finally unraveling, all weighed on her heart. Yet watching Valor fight his way back from the brink, she found courage she thought she'd lost. Thomas Grady, newly named as the head of the K-9 unit, carried himself with a proud, steady bearing despite the lingering stiffness in his injured leg. He now wore a Navy field jacket marked K-9 Captain on the chest, his badge freshly polished. The others in the station, Jake Donnelly with his wry humor and suspicious blue eyes, Lila Forbes with her gentle hands and big laugh, Maria, Dr. Hart, and the rest looked to Thomas for calm and direction. He gave it gladly, leading with humility and an unwavering sense of justice. Bear, the younger German shepherd, was almost always nearby, his own paw now fully healed, a small scar the only reminder of his brief ordeal. He took to watching over Valor as if he were an apprentice guarding a master, his manner a blend of goofy affection and surprising seriousness. The two dogs became a fixture in the daily life of the station, symbols of steadfastness and hope. The investigation, led by Rachel and the state authorities, swept through Bitter Creek like a cleansing wind. Sheriff Dalton and Mark Howie were tried and convicted, their web of illegal logging, forgery, and violence brought into the open. Several others fled or confessed. With the help of the new K-9 unit and the cooperation of townsfolk, Bitter Creek reclaimed its dignity and its peace. When the last paperwork was filed and the last courtroom drama ended, Thomas gathered the team in the clearing where the first fire had burned, now peaceful, draped in fresh snow and sunlight. Rachel was there in her new deputy's uniform, her hair tied back in a neat braid, her eyes shining with resolve. Maria and Dr. Hart stood nearby, Bear bounced in the snow, and a handful of townsfolk loggers, hikers, old friends, clustered at the edge of the trees. The whole station was there, bundled in winter coats, faces hopeful. Valor sat in the center, his side still marked by a line of stitches, fur slowly regrowing, a proud and gentle look in his amber eyes. Thomas approached him, kneeling so their eyes were level. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold K-9 badge, the letters gleaming in the thin sunlight. For a moment, everyone held their breath. Thomas cleared his throat, voice low but ringing with emotion. You saved lives, Valor. You saved this team, this forest, and you saved me. This badge belongs to you, not just for what you've done, but for what you stand for loyalty, for courage, and for hope that doesn't die, even when the night is coldest. He fastened the badge to Valor's collar. The old dog looked up at him, tail sweeping the snow. For a second, there was only silence, the hush of the pines, the glitter of frost, the stillness of a moment that would become legend. Rachel stepped forward, her voice trembling with joy. Thank you, Valor. We wouldn't be here without you." She knelt to hug the dog, her tears mingling with the cold. Bear barked and circled them both, tail wagging in wild celebration. The team laughed, the circle tightening. Thomas raised a hand in salute, the badge shining between his fingers. "We'll stand together," he promised, "no matter the storm, no matter the danger. As long as there's snow in these woods, we'll fight for what's right." Together. As the sun set behind the frozen peaks, casting long blue shadows across the snow, Valor stood tall, a living, breathing symbol of all they had endured and overcome. Around him, his team, his family, held each other close, and for the first time in a long time, Bitter Creek felt truly safe. In the heart of Bitter Creek's deepest winter, when all seemed lost, it was not only courage and loyalty that brought light through the darkness, but also a quiet miracle. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or lightning, but in the simple acts of love, bravery, and faith that unite us through trials. Perhaps it is God's gentle hand, guiding both human and animal, that helps us find hope when we are most afraid. And perhaps, in those moments when we choose to stand by each other, to never give up on goodness, we become part of something far greater than ourselves. As we walk through our own daily storms through loss, doubt, or loneliness, let us remember that miracles are possible and that with faith, compassion, and a loyal heart, there is always a way forward. Maybe you too have been rescued by an unexpected friend, or found hope where you least expected it. That too is a kind of miracle. If this story has touched your heart, please share it with a friend, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Write Amen in the comments if you believe in miracles, if you believe that God can work through even the humblest among us, and if you wish blessings and protection for all those facing hard times tonight. May God bless you and keep you safe always.